But I want to talk with you about something special today.
All right.
Have you ever looked into the eyes of an SJW and seen an incredible lack of awareness? A sort of emptiness, like you're staring into the abyss. A deep, endless abyss.
I'm not sure I'm the guy you want to ask that question.
So I have a hypothesis. I think they're experiencing something similar to epistemological joy. You know, the mass hysteria in trance-like state that evangelical Christians can put themselves into?
Yeah, I'll buy that, sure. Anything that flicks your switch is going to set off endorphins, right?
And when their political beliefs were confirmed, the ventral striatum was the part of the brain that was stimulated. This is the same part of the brain that's stimulated by heroin and cocaine.
Yeah, I hate to tell you this, but that's just plain old common sense. Whatever flicks your bick gets you excited. And that's exactly why me and you had some words. And I do want to go over those words that we had, but it's not because I want to take you on. It's because I want to demonstrate to people that putting down libertarian ideas is not rational. It's emotional. I guess I should say that's been my experience, that folks poo-poo libertarian thought without giving it a fair airing. So let me set this up. Feminist Flow had a live stream where he interviewed feminist Kevin Logan, a.k.a. Mr. Potato Head. And as a result of that interview, Flow received some heat from some elements of the anti-feminist community. I guess the complaint was that Feminist Flow didn't challenge Mr. Potato Head, and so that pissed a bunch of them off. Subsequent to that interview, Feminist Flow held another live stream where a panel from the anti-feminist community debated the issue. Guests included Babbling Brook, Femfighter, Marking Bad, Naked Ape, Nicholas Goroff, Nightmare Fuel Podcast, Queenie, and Woolly Bumblebee. And basically Naked Ape's position, I think, is that he felt that people with bad ideas, it's all right that they have a platform, but the government shouldn't really give them a platform. And people that know that the idea is a bad idea need to challenge these people while they're on the platform. So let's listen to the ape in his own words.
I've been mentioned like twice. I keep on saying that I have a more nuanced position than you're arguing against, and I just want to make sure it's clear. I'm not saying that Kevin Logan is similar to ISIS. I wasn't saying that. I was saying that there are simply some ideas out there that a responsible person would have to, if they gave these ideas their platform, would have to give them in a very nuanced way. The problem is with the regressive left is that they don't pick and choose individual ideas that are bad. Like, say, terrorism. That's a bad idea. White supremacism.
They fucking don't.
Well, what I'm saying is that let me allow this. So that terrorism and white supremacism, I personally think communism as well, are all terrible ideas that should individually be always given a negative platform. But when it comes to like just people who have differing opinions on you, like say for example, if you believe in single-payer healthcare, right? That is an inherently evil idea, and you being for that doesn't make you a bad person. You still want the same thing, which is just you want the most people to have healthcare in a meritocratic system, good things for the society. So they view everybody who disagrees with them as inherently being just as evil as a white supremacist or a terrorist. I'm saying that it is a wrong view to say that everybody who disagrees with you should not be given any platform at all, but there are certain individual ideas that should be treated negatively because these are not good ideas. And like with the specific example of the teacher teaching that the Holocaust didn't happen, so there is a difference between not allowing someone to say that in public and then enfranchising that into your school system by allowing someone to teach it in homeschooling. So it is a legitimate thing for the government to require people who act as educators to educate the truth. This is why it is a legitimate thing for the government to deny a platform to people who want to say that the Holocaust didn't happen. That's denying them the government platform of education. However, they should be able to go on their own and create their own platform. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I totally disagreed with that. In my view, if Feminist Flow wants to extract Kevin Logan's ideology out of him by letting Kevin Logan blab on, that's a good thing, because we can all respond to it and do response videos and think through it ourselves. It's called freedom of speech, Naked Ape. But the thing that fucking really disturbed me was this idea that government schools don't teach bullshit, when it's the government schools that are teaching kids as young as 8 all the way through middle school and high school feminist ideas, teaching them safe spaces, failing to teach them anything positive about the Enlightenment and our founding fathers and the idea of libertarianism and the protection of life, liberty, and property, and that is the legitimate functions of a government. I'm not saying that we ever achieved that, but our schools are teaching feminism and not teaching this other thing. And that problem really needs to be fixed. And so I made this comment in the comment section during the live stream. Naked Ape, you can't be serious. The government is one of the biggest pipelines of lies on the planet. And you would trust them to tell us what we can and can't teach our own children? Dude, that's 1984. Homeschoolers are rejecting the lies of government and taking their kids out of that system. But you would use collectivism to take that away from the people. As if they don't have a right to disagree with the government or you or the majority or the self-appointed people that know best. You just put yourself in the same camp as feminism. You need to think that shit through a second time. To which Naked Ape responded,
"The government has a right to issue credentials and set standards for education. If you're homeschooling your children but they aren't actually receiving a qualified education, then you aren't actually teaching them anything and they will be unprepared for the world. Therefore, it is a legitimate government interest to set standards for private schools and homeschools that they must meet in order to be legitimate forms of education to meet the requirement for receiving a high school education. A religious school has to teach evolution. A homeschool has to teach math. If they teach the Holocaust revisionism, then they are not a legitimate form of education and the government has an interest in not accrediting them. You're just like the feminists trying to censor me. Okay, now come back with an argument that isn't hyperbolic tinfoil nonsense."
And I responded to this, but evidently I found out from Feminist Flow just recently that this post was flagged as spam. So to my knowledge, Naked Ape never saw this and never had the opportunity to respond to this. But anyway, here's what I said. No, the government does not have, quote, the right, unquote, to issue credentials and set standards, blah, 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 blah. What they have is power, as we shall see. Yes, if you are homeschooling your children and doing a shitty job, you are, as near as we can tell, doing no worse than the public school system. And then I left a link to one of my vids where I went over some studies going over homeschools versus public schools. And I encourage you to go look at that video and look at the studies. And basically, we have no evidence that homeschoolers are doing any worse than public schools. Continuing, so congrats with that argument that flies in the face of facts. Your claim that the government has a legitimate interest in setting standards is seriously doubtful. The very education system that you are relying on is the one turning out adult children that need safe spaces, etc. Your point about religious schools detracts from your point. Our nation was almost exclusively taught in religious schools during the Enlightenment, and that turned out pretty well, I would say. Further, religious schools still exist, disproving your point that the government has the right to set standards and this legitimate interest that you're so glib about. If the government had such a right, then why do they allow evolution to be taught at all? Oh, that's right. The people have what is called a superseding right, the right to practice their religion civilly and peacefully. Look at the First Amendment. It's pretty hard to miss. Now, saying that, I'm not a believer. So you're not arguing with the person that believes in God. What I do believe in, though, are individual rights, and the right that you say government has is really a power that it only has over public schools. That's it. If you believe in the right of self-determination and the right of the individual and the right to religious freedom. Now, keep in mind, Naked Ape is arguing that the government has the right to set standards of homeschools and religious schools, and if you don't meet those standards, you can't get government accreditation. And I'll concede that that is not taking away a person's right to be educated in the manner that he or she sees fit or the parents see fit. But I don't agree that the government should be doing that. Just like marriage, the government really shouldn't be involved in that. And just let the people decide whether somebody that went to homeschooling or to a religious school is right for their business. Anyway, continuing. Now here's where your argument really falls flat. The people are not the toy things of the government. I don't give a rat's ass if the people are 8% smarter on average going to your public schools or not. What I care about is people being able to live the lives they want to live. I have no obligation to you or anyone else to build a skyscraper for you, cure your cancer, or anything else. I don't owe that to you or any number of yous. You act like the people are the slaves of the government under this nefarious, quote, legitimate interest, unquote, buzzword standard that you just pulled out of your ass without thinking about what that really means. That legal standard has been eroding away at individual rights since the beginning of the American experiment. It is the most immoral and unsound principle against human liberty that has ever been invented. Yes, you are acting exactly like a feminist. Exactly. You can poo-poo me with your ad hom, but let's just go through what feminists say government says and you say. 1. Feminist/Marxist. Postmodernism is good, and you should not be allowed to hurt someone's feelings with free speech. 2. Government. Teach postmodernism and multiculturalism, and fund programs that turn out students that want to suppress free speech. 3. Naked Ape. Your children should be placed in the government education system. To hell with your right, secured by the Bill of Rights, to live the civil, peaceful life you choose, to practice your faith, because you don't get to do that if the government has a legitimate interest. And then I asked, are you informed on Common Core? And then I basically afforded Naked Ape a chance to reconsider and apologize for the way he dismissed my arguments. So I had a brief follow-up text conversation with Naked Ape the other day, and he was pleasant. He basically reaffirmed his position that he believes the government has a legitimate interest in setting industry standards, including what qualifies as a high school diploma. He also states that the government is the one that effectively puts its stamp of approval on what is a quality education, but he doesn't really get into what not having that stamp of approval should bar you from doing into your life. So I don't know if he thinks the government has a right to stop private schools or interfere with private curriculum, or that people should be barred from certain trades or whatever if they don't have the government's stamp of approval. Those are important things to know, because if the government is impeding the individual in his life because he doesn't have this stamp of approval, that doesn't seem to me to be a, quote, legitimate interest, unquote. Anyway, I think it's fair to say that Naked Ape believes that he is being pragmatic and realistic, and that libertarian arguments against public education is ideologically stupid. I'm saying Naked Ape is getting a dopamine rush when he dismisses libertarian argument the way he's doing it, and that is driving his refusal to consider libertarian argument. Let me get into the details. First of all, he doesn't address the libertarian argument at all, really. He just says how he wants things to be ran and why. Basically, he's came up with an authoritarian approach to society. Put the ape in charge and everything's going to be okay. Naked Ape doesn't bother to address the very first precept of libertarianism. And let's just avoid all of the postmodern sophistries and go straight to what libertarianism is really about. It's really easy to get that information by using dictionaries and other primary references before postmodernism infected our lexicon and universities. So if you go to Webster's Dictionary 1828.com And if you go in there and look up libertarian, you get the classic definition. And out of that, the libertarian school of thought succinctly wrapped up. The entry states that libertarian is an adjective, and it pertains to, quote, liberty or the doctrine of free will as opposed to the doctrine of necessity, unquote. And the doctrine of free will, you should be able to do what you want as long as it doesn't interfere with somebody else's free will. It's the golden rule, really. But you will find that Enlightenment libertarian thinkers identified that free will can only be sustained if governments protect the individual's right to life, liberty, and property. An Enlightenment age libertarian thinker might say that the protection of said rights is the only legitimate function of a government. Otherwise, free will means nothing. Okay, Naked Ape and anyone else, if you can, please tell me what justification there is to deprive someone of their own free will, other than it imposing on somebody else's right to life, liberty, and property. I mean, where's your line? When a majority, mob says it's okay to deprive another of his free will? Well, that doesn't sound very moral to me. It doesn't sound just at all. The use of government force for the protection of the individual's free will is libertarianism. To a libertarian, that's what constitutes a legitimate interest of government. Our definition is meaningful, and it's clear when you reference the rights to life, liberty, and property together with our Bill of Rights. Libertarians may have many different ways of expressing the legitimate interest, but if you trace it back to my definition here, you'll see we have a clear idea of what a legitimate interest of government is. We have a definition that people can rely on from the day they're born till the day that they die. What is the Naked Apes or the authoritarians out there? What is your definition of a legitimate interest? One that changes with the wind, I suppose. One year it's whether or not women can expose themselves, and the next it's whether or not a man can look at the woman who exposed themselves. Under an authoritarian rubric, these are legitimate interests of government if the government or proponents of the authoritarian rule do not have to define their own terms. And that's essentially what's been going on throughout American history. And it's been used as a weapon to erode away our individual rights. I really encourage viewers to look up that phrase in Supreme Court cases, and you'll see how ambiguous that fucking term is in the legal world.
To quote Haidt's book, rats who can press a button to deliver electrical stimulation to their reward centers will continue pressing until they collapse from starvation. Like rats that cannot stop pressing a button, partisans may be simply unable to stop believing weird things. The partisan brain has been reinforced so many times for performing mental contortions that free it from unwanted beliefs. Extreme partisanship may literally be addictive. Social justice and feminism use a number of rhetorical devices so loosely defined that you can never actually define them in any real scientific, measurable way. Terms like privilege, marginalization, identities are so...
Let me guess, are very similar to the term legitimate interest, and authoritarians can use that term to justify just about anything that they want to.
Ambiguous that an SJW can use these rhetorical devices to explain everything and anything.
Nailed it.
Everything they experience can be understood under these ambiguous terms. Their ideology is literally built around reinforcing their own confirmation bias by performing rhetorical mental contortions.
Like using a vaguely defined term, say legitimate interest, for the collective to impose its authoritarian will over the individual whenever it suits the collective's fancy. Right?
In other words, it's impossible. This is a theory that cannot be proven wrong.
You'll get no argument for me. The way the Supreme Court and you are treating the term legitimate interest, there's no way for anyone to prove that anything is not a legitimate government interest. I agree with your analysis 100%.
Her argument is just a rhetorical device which says that people who disagree with me are evil.
Or say autistic and unpragmatic fools with tinfoil hats? Libertarians reject the idea that we are servants to our government. That doesn't make any sense to us whatsoever. Why would it be incumbent upon a person to maximize his productivity for the benefit of the nation state rather than himself. Why would I want to work 80 hours a week so my nation can be the wealthiest nation on earth? Why not make it 112 hours a week? Why not force me to work 112 hours a week? If the goal of government is to maximize the wealth of a nation, then why not force us to do what you want us to do? It seems to me under Naked Ape's definition of legitimate interest, if making me work 112 hours a week would profit the nation, he can do so. And in that vein, why should children only have to go to school for 6 hours a day when we could all prosper more by forcing them to go to school for 12 hours a day, 52 weeks out of the year? That's not a problem for the libertarian mindset because we don't believe we were born for the benefit of the government. We believe we were born for our own benefit. And the government doesn't have a right to force us to do anything but leave other people alone that want to be left alone. That doesn't mean that the government goes unfunded or any of that other nonsense that you hear from anti-libertarians. There are plenty of ways to fund the government without using force. But I don't want to get into that here. I want to focus on this idea that it's the government's business to ensure that I am a productive person. That's bullshit. It's not the government's business. The government's business is to stay the fuck out of my business. I'm not beholden to profit my neighbor. I'm not beholden to profit the government. Not at all. I'm a free man. I'm not a slave. I don't give a shit if our nation would collectively be 8% richer by giving up our freedoms. Libertarians want to exercise free will. We don't care about 8% larger homes, 8% fancier cars, over our right to be free, to do as we please so long as we don't harm another. So please, all you authoritarians out there, tell me how it's moral to force someone to be productive for the benefit of another against his or her free will. If you can't easily tell me how it's moral, then I think you're beginning to understand why libertarians are opposed to public schools. You're on track anyway. You may disagree, but at least try to understand what we're saying. Libertarians do not agree with the idea of being compelled by force to pay for a public school. These are the very same schools that in turn teach children to disrespect the freedoms of the very people that fund said schools. That's self-evident, but if you doubt me, just take a survey of students, ask them a few questions, for example, whether or not it should be a crime for a white man to tell a black woman he thinks she's a filthy, dirty fucking nigger whore. And you'll see the students have been taught to think that that should be against the law. Whereas a libertarian would say something like, well, that is a horrible statement, and it's reprehensible, of course, but since she has not been harmed in her life, liberty, or property, then the law should not intervene. Therefore, you are forcing libertarians to pay the government to churn out children that work against our own political ideology. And these children are inclined to support the use of force whenever it serves the authoritarian government's so-called legitimate interests. I would love to have meaningful conversations with people of different ideologies, so long as we're not talking past each other and we're addressing each other's points.